Okay, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to Building Participation and Engagement. And thank you for the warm welcome, Ali Jaffrey, much appreciated. So, how to increase participation and engagement amongst your employees? Well, this is something that's preoccupied me for the majority of my 25 years in higher education. And I must confess that for the most part, this for me meant encouraging engagement amongst students in the classroom, as originally I was an academic and a teacher. More recently, this has extended to my academic colleagues, as Ali Jaffrey has already said. I'm now primarily a manager and a higher education leader at Coventry University, which is a greatly expanding university. So I'm now manager of academics rather than just students, and that presents some of its own challenges and pleasures as well. And some of that I'm going to share with you today, and hopefully offer you some practical hints and tips that may be of use to you in the future. So just to give you a brief outline of what I'm going to talk about today. So here's the key areas, the 5 key areas. So starting with the first one, empowerment. And I'm just going to experiment now. And now forgive me if I don't do a particularly good job here. So I'm going to highlight some points. I'm going to experiment with the spotlight. There we go, that's it. So on to the first point. So in my very early days as a young academic, I was extremely keen, I'm was very passionate, as many of us are when we're very young, we're in our first early flush of our careers. I was extremely keen to reduce the power distance between me and my students and to empower them in the classroom. And I felt very, very much that this was important, not just for their learning, for their experience, but also for my own development as an educator. And I used to believe, moving on to the second point just for a moment, I used to believe that participation of the students in the classroom activities was key to this. And in my mind, I didn't separate those two things, empowerment of the students and participation in the classroom. I saw them as very much the same thing. And I suspect that many other academics would say the same thing, and maybe many managers as well, either use the terms interchangeably or have never really thought about what exactly it is they're doing when they're engaging in these two activities. And so over the course of this webinar, I'm going to hopefully outline some definitions of these, which are hopefully very practical definitions, which have been developed by me over many years. I'll define both of the terms and then explain why you should want to encourage either of them or both of them. And I'll explain also why it's useful to consider them separately before beginning to bring them back together again. And finally, I will explain how some techniques from storytelling can be useful to a manager who wishes to encourage employees to develop more fully in decision making in their organisation and to engage in the workplace. Okay, just seem to be, let me just take the spotlight off. I think that may be causing a problem with me moving on.
Dr. Tina, just click on the slide, yeah? If you want to move.
Okay, all right. Okay, it worked for the first time, but now I've got the spotlight on. I think something has gone slightly now. So I will go to the pointer again, but I think I know how to get off that quickly when I need to. So back on track. So what is empowerment? Now, it's quite important, I think, to explain that this is a management style that's very distinct from delegation. And if you are delegating, then you are assigning responsibilities or a responsibility to others in the workplace, normally somebody who's in a subordinate position to you. And it does not require necessarily empowerment or participation from the employee. And it is worth asking yourself as a manager, I feel, and this is something I ask myself regularly, if you sometimes delegate duties without considering, first of all, if this is helpful in the longer term, both for the employee that you've delegated to and to the organisation as a whole. So it's worth thinking through, before you delegate an activity to somebody, it's worth thinking through how you could perhaps make this a more fuller activity. So, for instance, a very basic delegation might be asking someone to carry out a task in a very specific way in the workforce. So you may say, please input this data in the order it appears on this list. So very, very basic delegation of a task. If you're empowered, then there becomes some flexibility in how it is that you're working. So you may say to an employee, this stockroom needs tidying, needs reorganizing, and it needs to be done over the next couple of weeks. I'm leaving this with you to sort out. And then providing, this is the key point, providing the individual has the resources to do this, then it is potentially empowering rather than just a delegation of a task. And I will explain some of this a little bit more as we go on and where my thinking's taken me. So normally we think of empowering individuals, and I think it's also worth stopping here to think about, for me, it's very rarely been about individuals, because in the UK we tend to very much encourage students to work in groups, to encourage them to work in teams, but also now that I'm managing academics, we very much have course teams, and we have subject teams and subject groups and research groups, and everything's about team, even though we perhaps think of academics as being sort of stars and prominent individuals. And if you did look at any of the textbooks around self-managed teams, these are often described as the sort of ultimate in empowerment. So this might be, in an academic setting, this might very well be a course team where the academics come together and they know what their goals are, and they are allowed to work towards those goals as they see best. And perhaps a creative team, a programming team. There's many instances of self-managed team, and these are seen as the ultimate, both in terms of delegation but also empowerment. And as I say, then these are not necessarily the same things. Okay, I seem to have, I've gone to normal non-drawing mode and I'm struggling to move the mouse on. Let's just see if that works. Okay, so empowerment then in a little bit more detail. It's about relaxing control and giving people space to make their own decisions. And this can be quite challenging because very often as a manager, there is an anxiety. We're given objectives, we're given goals, we're given targets, and there is an anxiety to tightly control that, to make yourself feel that you are working towards those objectives. But actually empowerment, relaxing control, giving people space to make decisions, provided it is done in a structured way, in a constructive way, is actually a much better way forward. And as I say, hopefully a few of the examples I give later will reinforce that. So the things that empowerment will do for people. First of all, this term, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but I'll explain very briefly. Giving people space to make decisions, empowering them, develops something called self-efficacy beliefs or personal efficacy, which is very, very crudely put, confidence in one's own ability to achieve intended results. So it's confidence. So by empowering somebody, if it's done well, you will help them to develop their confidence and their ability to do tasks in the future. And this is where you're actually growing and building the organisation. It can also, and very often in my experience, does also enhance job satisfaction. If you feel that you have some control over the work that you're doing, then this by necessity helps you to feel that you enjoy your job more fully, that you have more control. You'll feel more positively about going into the workplace. And I think here it also potentially spreads some of the expertise and therefore some of the pressure around the organisation. And again, this is where there is quite a challenge for managers, and in some cases, inexperienced managers, or perhaps managers that worked in perhaps not the most comfortable working environments, will feel that they need to keep knowledge and control with themselves, because this is how they will prove that they are indispensable and therefore promotable and will give themselves enhanced security. But again, spreading pressure around the organisation, spreading expertise around the organisation means that everybody potentially has enhanced job satisfaction and also develops self-efficacy beliefs. And as I said, it's not just me talking from a theoretical point of view. I'm trying to avoid that very much. This is drawing on the theory and talking about things that I feel have worked very well for me so far in my career. So you've got expertise and you've got the pressure. And I suppose that the most important sort of point to make here is, and I've sort of hinted at it so far, is that this must be supported and facilitated. Not everyone will feel comfortable or confident if you give them a task to undertake and give them the freedom and flexibility to go ahead and do that. That may actually feel quite threatening. They might feel that they're being set up, that you're looking for them to make a mistake. So in order to help make that a confidence building exercise, you need to support and facilitate and provide resources as well. And that might simply be about mentoring. So this may be about just making regular contact with this person and just saying, is everything going okay? Do you feel you need anything from me? Are you worried about anything? So just very sort of lightly supportive and encouraging discussion with them. So I'm going to switch now to move away from empowerment just for a moment. I'll come back to this at the end of this webinar. So just to switch now to participation, which is very much intertwined and interconnected with empowerment, but is not necessarily the same thing. So individuals or teams, which is what I'm most familiar with, may work on their own projects without necessarily participating in organisational decision making. And sometimes you may have come across employees who appear to work fairly well, but they don't actually participate. They don't inject ideas into the organisation or strengthen the organisation in the way that you feel that they could. There's just something missing in terms of their participation. Now, it is possible to have employees engaged in the decision-making process without them being fully empowered, and just let me explain that a little further. So one of the things that you can do to gain the participation of your employees without necessarily letting go of any power initially is to survey them. And this could be an anonymous survey, it could be an open survey, it could be something very, very simple. It could be something as simple as the colour of the walls for a redecoration, or the type of furniture or arrangement of furniture in an office. So you can survey your employees for their opinions, and it might be something more important, such as the direction of future product lines. But ultimately, it will be the managing director or the head of department or the head of school or the dean or whatever your organisation is who will make the final decision. So the employees in this scenario or in these scenarios have no power to make the direct decisions about the colour of the walls or the type of furniture, but you may actually help them to feel more connected and more engaged by inviting them to participate in the decision-making process. Now, I think one thing that I haven't put onto this slide, which is also worth mentioning here, is that it has to feel genuine. So you have to be genuine in asking and gathering people's opinions. And whatever form of survey you put out to your employees, you need to be prepared to take some action, even if it's just to say, you know, half of the people said X, a quarter said Y, and a quarter said Z, and ultimately this was discussed by the board, and we've gone for the first of these. But thank you very much for your input. So a survey, really simple way of encouraging participation without necessarily empowering, if that feels just maybe a step too far in your particular workplace at the moment. So how does participation improve things? So and again, I'm trying not to link too much to the theory. Keep it. This is based on my own experiences. So it does engage employees. As I said, it's very important that to sustain that engagement, it feels genuine, that people feel that there's something coming out of this for them. It can aid the development of really good, really robust decision making. So if you are thinking about the future of your organisation and you perhaps want to gather some opinion from your vast number of employees about the technological advancements that might support your organisation, the future directions of product lines, all of these things, you may find that by putting this out to your employees, you get information back that you could never have gathered just on your own. That actually you're getting a real sense of what's out there from your employees, who may be generally quite quiet. Again, this can enhance job satisfaction. Even those employees who don't necessarily engage or may not want to feel empowered, it still may make them feel happier about coming to work, knowing that they're being asked for their opinion on some key decisions. On the negative side, this might slow down decision making. So if there was a decision that needed to be made very urgently, very quickly, then perhaps participation is not the time to start that process. And if it's an expensive survey that you're undertaking, if it's a very large organisation, if it involves a lot of effort and resources, it may be difficult for you to justify in terms of a clear return on investment. And at this point here, I could probably talk to you for another hour about this one, but sometimes when you're encouraging participation from employees or empowerment, you may need to think quite deeply about the structure of your organisation. So if you're trying to encourage team participation, for instance, maybe your organisation doesn't help that. Maybe the layout of your buildings or the way that you organise yourself doesn't support team participation. So it's very difficult to encourage one form of participation if you actually don't have the structures in place for that. So this is another day, perhaps another talk. Just a little pause for a moment. Again, a little bit about me. So as a young academic, I attempted at times to empower students through classroom activities, getting students to take a lead on what subjects they wanted to study next, what subjects they wanted to study in more depth. Other times I tried to increase participation in classroom activities through surveys, through post-it note exercises, various other means. But as a more mature professional, as I've sort of moved on in my thinking, I've realised that I actually want to achieve both in whatever role I'm working in, with that sense that sometimes this can be a little bit slow. But generally speaking, I want to try and achieve both, because even though it's very difficult to get a true sense of the return on that investment, I know that this is the way to a really, really strong collegial participative workforce. And one of the things that this has led me to is to storytelling techniques. And I should say, I like stories. I like talking. I talk a lot. It's very nice to be invited to talk to you today. It's something that I really enjoy doing. I think most people like stories, either telling them or listening to them. But no one that I know in my life has led a life that would fit very neatly into the storylines, the kind of storylines that you find in films or dramas or children's stories. However, in our personal lives, and I definitely include myself here, we tend to talk about ourselves in story-like terms. So we'll retell a story of what happened today, and we'll place ourselves as the hero, or as the victim, or as the adventurer. And it will depend on our audience and what we're trying to achieve, whether we're talking to children, whether we're talking to adults or family members or friends. So we use storytelling techniques in our day-to-day lives to connect with people, and it is normally friends and families. But not many of us think about the power of those storytelling themes and narratives and how we might use them in our organisational lives a little bit more consciously to better effect. And I think this is something that I have thought about, and as I say, today I hope to share just a very small number of those techniques that I hope you'll begin to appreciate why I find it useful, and hopefully you will too. So over time, I've come to realise that my interest in stories and their structures has practical applications in my day-to-day life. So this is not just a hobby, it's not just something I do for a little bit of fun, it's become a little bit more than that. And my starting point is that human beings have a tendency to both tell stories to make sense of the world and life, and they also want to listen to stories that are well structured and with a clear narrative. And so some people like myself are very much people who like to tell stories, and I've had to train myself to listen. I actually, I think I'm better at the talking side of things than the listening side of things, and perhaps there are others out there who are saying, yes, perhaps that's me too. This is helpful, I think, for a manager, because it means that when we're dealing with our colleagues, we're not limited by having to play what I call it the truth game. So if one colleague tells you a story of themselves as a victim of a conspiracy, you know, they did this and look what happened, it wasn't my fault. And then another colleague comes to you and describes that same person as lazy and difficult. It's very easy to get into the mindset of working out who's telling the truth here. And actually, one of the things I've learned as a manager is that it's much more effective to try and move past that and actually try and think about how we can make sense of what's happening here without judging necessarily who is playing the truth game, because people like to present themselves to best effect or to create an effect with the person that they're talking to. So to their manager, they might want to look like they've been a victim of bad behaviour by a colleague, but they may describe it in a different way to somebody else. It's not necessarily about truth or lies. This is just about how people tell stories and make sense of themselves. And I found this really, really helpful, because it means that you can make sense of relationships with colleagues, no matter how difficult they appear to be, and find ways of moving on. And for me, that means that the focus has moved on from what is true, who's telling the truth, whose fault was it, to actually how are we going to coordinate here, how are we going to move on, how are we going to make this work. And I think, as I say, for me, this has actually greatly reduced my anxiety in being a manager, essentially of a lot of very, very highly intelligent people, many of whom are a lot smarter than me. So have to find a way of managing that effectively. And so I believe that without expensive courses, without extensive courses, but with practice, and it does require practice, you can train yourself to listen more closely to stories told by your colleagues, but also you can train yourself to tell more powerful and constructive stories. And you might want to start by thinking about which of those you're better at now. As I said, I will happily admit that I have always been very good at telling stories, at structuring events, at creating narratives, explaining myself, justifying myself. You know, these are all things I know I can do. But actually I found that starting to train myself to listen more closely to the stories that are told by my colleagues and trying to think more deeply about where those stories are coming from, what it is they're actually telling me, and you know, what I can do with this and how I can work with this. This has been the real challenge for me, and as I say, over the last 3 or 4 years, I think I've been starting to get somewhere with this. So I would like at this point to emphasise again why I think this is important, and start to introduce some of those simple tips that I've been promising you. And remember, the starting point of this session is about building participation and engagement. And the manager or the leader in any organisation, any setting, is really important in this. So you are important in this, and it doesn't matter whether you're a very new manager working at a very, very low level in an organisation, whether you're very senior. I think everyone is important, and every manager is important in terms of being able to create a more constructive and positive environment for employees. And I think the first thing that you have a role to play in is being attentive to negative stories. And I think this is something you can all do. You can all start thinking about this. And I know I'm sitting here in the UK, and many of you are in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So we're in a very different context, a very different setting. But I have great confidence that stories get past all cultural barriers, and that this will resonate with you all. So negative stories. The kind of things that people might say in the workplace to another colleague, or they don't want me to succeed, or he doesn't want me to succeed, or she doesn't want me to succeed, my efforts are not appreciated, my ideas are good but no one listens to me. You may even hear it's not fair, which is rarer, but does happen from time to time. So these I would characterise as victim stories, you know, and quite often as a manager, and I can clearly remember when I first moved into a management position, and I had more and more of these stories coming to me, you know, colleagues who I'd only ever talked to on a very similar level, started to come to me with sort of victim stories. And as a manager, I think you have a responsibility to simultaneously listen and to try and absorb what actually is happening here, but also to try and interrupt these stories, because ultimately negative stories are quite damaging to the atmosphere in a workplace. They can be quite draining. They actually sort of drain energy from people. So you have an obligation to try and interrupt these, but actually directly challenging somebody who's describing themselves as a victim can also be problematic. If you do that, you can be seen as, oh, you're one of them, you're just a manager, you don't care, and they may very well disengage from you. So what you really need to do is to try and think about other ways that you can turn this story around without being too directly challenging. So if somebody says to you, they don't want me to succeed, you might start with saying, I know it can be very difficult. There are a lot of really talented people working here. And I know that when I first started, I realised it was really important to, and then go on to give an anecdote of something that you did when you first started in that workplace that helped you to push on and be more successful. the idea is then by pushing back very gently one of your own stories or a story of another colleague. So you may actually recount a story of someone very senior who struggled with something at some point in their past, or who initially didn't do very well, didn't get promoted for a long time, but then went on to great things. Those kind of stories are very, very powerful. Sending the message, not only are you interrupting the story and interrupting that sort of negative flow, but you're also saying to that person, I think you could succeed. I think you have got things that you can offer. I think you have got things that could be appreciated. And even if this is somebody who you find quite difficult, who tells a lot of negative stories, you can chip away at that. And as I say, I have some experiences, some very direct experiences with that, which have been very, very powerful. Okay, so starting to pick out a few hints and tips. So we looked at interrupting negative stories. So this is something you can do at any point. You can start doing that. You can start listening. You can start thinking about those people around you who do this, who have a habit of putting themselves in a victim mode, and who perhaps not only are not necessarily as happy as they could be in their workplace, but are not actually contributing as much as they could be, because all that sort of negative storytelling tends to distract from creative and constructive and positive input. So you can also be better at telling stories. So as I said, this is something I think I've already got a reasonable strength at, but I know not everybody is comfortable consciously thinking about how they can frame something in a storytelling way. So don't just listen and interrupt. If you do just do that, then that obviously isn't going to necessarily be very helpful, or not helpful for long. But you can also use positive and powerful stories to convey key messages in your organisation. So don't just present the bare facts. Don't just say, we launched 30 new products in the last 12 months. Don't just give the bare stats and the bare facts. Tell a story. Find an entrepreneur who can say how great your business was in supporting them. Find customers who can tell stories of how much your business has turned things around for them or transformed things for them. Try not to just, as a manager, try not to just present the bare facts. And this is absolutely not about lying or even putting a spin on things, as the term is, but just taking those facts and building a story that may be a story of adventure or challenge or overcoming something monstrous or horrible, and using the kind of techniques that are used in narrative all of the time, and using the kind of powerful language that you might use with your family if you wanted everyone to feel quite relaxed and at ease. So to think about and practice, practice on your family. Think about when you do start to use those stories, or if there's someone in your family or a friend or a colleague who's very good at telling stories, think really consciously about what it is they're doing. Are they very good at picking up and creating a plot? Are they very good at developing character? Is it that they're very good at developing themes and narratives? Is it the storyline that they're good at? Being able to do these things could transform how you're perceived in the workplace, as well as encouraging a more positive and constructive environment. And just again, I'm not entirely sure if I did try and find. I'm not entirely sure if you're familiar with IKEA or IKEA, which is a very, very large furniture company. I don't know if it has a presence in Saudi Arabia. I do apologise, but what I can tell you is that the story, and this is the important part for me, the story behind IKEA is the story of Ingvar Kamprad, the founder, who is still alive now, I believe, and was born in extreme poverty in rural Sweden in the 1920s, And the story of him, which is very well known throughout the company and throughout business techs and the business world, is that at the age of 6, he spontaneously, as an entrepreneur, went and sold matches to make money. At the age of 10, he was selling decorations and fish and pencils. And at the age of 17, he founded the IKEA business and gave it that name, IKEA. And he's now one of the richest men in the world. And his business is based in the narrative, in the story, on hard work and determination. Now, I have no idea how much of that story is wholly true, whether there's other things involved, whether there were people who gave money to Ingvar Kamprad to help boost his business in the early days. I don't know. What I will tell you is that the story is extremely powerful. The story has been retold in many, many textbooks, many business textbooks, magazine articles, newspaper articles, and anybody who works at IKEA knows the story, the foundation, this idea that it's about hard work and determination. And this is something that is conveyed on a regular basis throughout the organisation, and it has great power. So think about if you can build your own story, your own story of the organisation, whether you can elevate that story and make that story something that resonates throughout your organisation. So some conclusions then before we finish for questions. So very basic conclusions. Responsible organisations encourage self-efficacy in individuals. This is my personal philosophy. I think as a manager that I have a responsibility to develop confidence and get the best out of individuals, not just because of the contribution to the organisation, but because I think it's a positive thing to do for those individuals too. I think that both are intertwined. Decision-making processes involve and engage people appropriately and genuinely, and they should involve people appropriately and genuinely throughout an organisation. And developing an understanding of storytelling techniques can help you to be a better manager and lead to a more productive organisation. So I believe that all managers can contribute to the increased participation of employees, can support better their colleagues and employees, particularly when they've been empowered into a new role. And I very strongly believe that the way to do this is to be better at listening and telling stories, and to be conscious and aware of those stories when you're telling them and when you're hearing them. Thank you very much for your time.
Dr. Tina, we're done with the presentation now.
Yes, thank you very much for listening.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And folks, we are open for the question and answer. So if you have any questions, you could either put it in the question box, or you could equally raise your hand. So there are two options. You could either put it in the question box, or you could raise your hand. So let me go to a caller who has raised a hand. We have Brother Mahmoud Kutub. Brother, I'm trying to unmute you. Yes, you've been unmuted. Brother Mahmoud, could you introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yes, this is Mahmoud from Al-Andalus Private School in Taif. I want to ask the abbreviation ROI, what does it mean?
So I can't hear you very clearly. Could you say that again, please?
Yes, this is Mahmoud from Al-Andalus Private School in Taif, here in Saudi Arabia, okay?
Okay, thank you.
My question is about ROI.
Oh, return.
What does it stand for?
Apologies, I do try. It's return on investment.
A return?
Return on investment. So the idea that for most businesses, at the very highest level, managers will normally want to see exactly what they're getting back for the input of resources.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Brother Mahmoud Kutab, for your question. Now let me move to the question box. There are a few of them. There's another one. When have you used storytelling techniques recently as a manager, and how did they help?
Okay, so very recently, it was actually, well, with a student and with a colleague. So I'll start with the student. So I was faced with dealing with a student who was very upset. They'd made a very silly mistake and failed an assessment as a result, and it was a very silly mistake. And I think before I could move on with the student and talk to them about what they could do to start thinking about the resit, the reassessment, before I could do anything constructive with them, because they were so upset, I started by talking about the fact that when I was a student, when I was a young student, I too had made a couple of silly mistakes in my assessments, which I did, and I failed an exam, which I still remember very vividly. And this really helped to reassure them, because they know that I have a PhD and I'm working quite senior level in the university, and that did start to reassure them and relax them. And then I could move on and talk to them about what they could do constructively next to move on. I've also recently spoke with a colleague, a female colleague, who was struggling to assert herself in a team that she was in, and well, again, was quite upset. And so in that case, I let her talk for a very long time and tried to pick out what exactly the problems and the issues were, before again talking about some of my own struggles, but then offering her, in that particular case, offered her some hints and some advice about how I had previously managed to work with difficult colleagues, because I think she was in a very difficult situation. So I hope that answered your question.
Well, thank you very much. We have another caller who's raised a hand. Let me go. We have Miss Faima Noor, trying to unmute you. Ms. Faima Noor, I believe you have muted yourself, but you have raised your hand. I've been unable to. You're self-muted. This is the message I'm getting. Ms. Faima Noor, if you can unmute yourself so we can have your audio conversation with the speaker. Ms. Faima Noor? Okay. Now Ms. Faima Noor, can you hear us? Could you please introduce yourself and ask a question?
Pakistan. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Tina for conducting such a great session, and thank you so very much for sharing her experiences with us. My question is that can you please list down some other techniques other than the storytelling for employee engagement in workplace? Because what I'm perceiving is employee engagement is kind of a counseling session which you can do a case study based session, but what are the other techniques which you can incorporate into the workplace as a daily routine?
Okay, I mean, one of the other things that I tried to do, and there isn't really the time or the scope to go into this in great detail, but I'm very interested and very actively interested in a technique known as appreciative inquiry. So again, it's very much about starting point is language, which fascinates and interests me. But it's about dealing with trying to get past negatives in the workplace and get people thinking positively and constructively. So when somebody talks about failure or problems that they're having, that actually you try and move very swiftly. Don't deal with the problems, don't discuss the problems, but actually start focusing straight away on when you have been successful. Tell me about when you did this well. What did you do? What process did you use? How did it work? And to not, in many ways, not engage in or indulge somebody who is speaking in a very negative way. So there's a lot more to appreciative inquiry. There's a huge amount of information out there, and you can actually do appreciative inquiry type activities for whole organisations. But I think that's maybe I'll come back and talk to you about other techniques another day. I'm sorry, it's difficult to go into too much detail because it's quite a complex area.
Okay, it's okay, I understand.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Famanur, for your question. And let me move to question box. We have another one. Why do employees or students need to be empowered? Not many people want to be directed.
Okay, yeah, and that is a good question. So I think when you have people who are very perhaps quite timid, not very ambitious, who don't want to be empowered, they don't want to be given more responsibility, they don't want to be mentored and supported into higher positions, and that does happen. I think you have to respect that and perhaps go very gently and very slowly with such employees. But I still feel very strongly that as a manager, I have a responsibility to try and bring out the best in everybody that works with me and works for me. And I wouldn't want to put unnecessary pressure on somebody, but I do feel that some people don't realise what potential they have. You know, perhaps they are naturally quite lacking in confidence, and that if they're supported, mentored very, very gently, perhaps very slowly, that you can bring out the best in them, and that will contribute to the organisation as well as to their well-being as well. And I think that's there's two sides to this. All of this engagement and support for people, for me, it's both of these things equally. You're trying to make your organisation as strong as possible so that it survives, so that it thrives. But you also want your employees to be as strong as possible so that they too thrive and survive. So I think I would still push people. I would try and be respectful, but I would still push them just a little if they didn't seem to want to be empowered. And I hope that answers the question.
Oh, thank you very much. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar, Dr. Tina. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
I would just like to very, very much wholeheartedly thank you for the invitation to speak today, and to thank you for your extremely professional organisation, and to, I hope I say her name correctly, Raveda. I'd just like to thank you both. Yeah, I'd just like to thank you both. Very, very professional, very good experience, and I'm very happy to be here, so thank you.
Thank you very much, and I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for taking the time to deliver this live webinar through Miles platform. So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Tina Bass. Really appreciate that. I'm very grateful. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it. Please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn about our upcoming programs and webinars, or to equally access our archive depositories. With that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.